Good morning, Sid. How's it going?
Morning, Tiago. All well here? You?
Yeah. Very excited for this episode. Slightly different angle on things this week, I think, isn't it?
It is. It is. We'll try to introduce some of these episodes in the middle of our regular episodes, and these are going to be takes from some of the essays we found of interest in the Bitcoin space, and they're usually written by some very clever people, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. Now, there was one article this week in Forbes that I think caught both our eyes, written by Jameson Lopp. Jameson is co-founder and CTO of Casa, who we've talked about in previous episodes, who provide multi-sig technology. And he wrote this article on FU money, didn't he?
Yes, indeed. It's called Redefining FU Money.
Yeah, so there's quite a few interesting things there. So we thought we'd dive into that and see what comes out of it. So he starts off talking about what is FU money. So quoting from the article, he said, what does FU money entail? It's a position of power. It means you have achieved a complete ownership over yourself and your time. And I think there's nothing controversial there, is there? I think we'd all agree with that. It's everybody's dream, isn't it? The ability to just flip your middle finger, so to speak, to the boss when he's pissed you off, right? And that comes with money, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, we all dream of the day where we could just not have to go to work in the pouring rain and the horizontal winds, and it's miserable, and you feel like rubbish, and you just do not want to go to work to be shouted at. So yeah, it's the dream we all have.
Yeah. And I think, as he touches on, FU money is different for everybody, isn't it? I mean, some people would be happy with maybe, 6 months salary in the bank, which just gives them that runway to if something happens. Other people, real FU money might be never having to work again.
Yeah, it's a difference for everyone, I think, and we saw that over COVID, didn't we? A lot of people left big cities and went into the countryside because they said they'd rather survive for less than continue with the drudgery of day-to-day commute into London or other cities in a crowded, subway or metro, whatever you call it in your country.
Yeah, and I think if the people that have had the hard work and the luck, the privilege to get to the point of having FU money, they'll often tell you that having a lot of money in itself is work. And I think this boils down to what we keep banging on about here on the Bitcoin story, is how the money system is broken. So, in an ideal world, you should be able to go out there with a lot of hard work, take some calculated risks, and if it pays off, you end up getting a big reward. You should just be able to put that in your bank account and forget about it. You should be able to go windsurfing or do whatever it is you want to do. And that money, ideally, that purchasing power will just stay there. But as we all know, that just isn't the case anymore. So not only do you have to do all that hard work, take those calculated risks, you then have to start all over just in order to keep that. And the more money you have, then the more complicated things get.
And you're right. And it's not just that you can take calculated risks and you'll get there. The problem also occurs is that you sometimes have to take just risks in terms of how to get there. It's not easy to get to the point where you can have a few money. So I find that quite staggering, where people say, oh yeah, I made X million this year doing this, and you do this and you'll also be successful. I mean, everybody has a take on it, but it's not, everybody knows it's not straightforward.
Yeah, for sure. It's not. And so I'll give you another quick quote here. He then goes on to say that a person with traditional FU money will have a diversified portfolio to ensure some protection against inflation and single points of failure, the too many eggs in one basket problem. So this is kind of what we're saying. And I mean, you look at, for example, the Russians, right? Not to get into the whole war thing, but you saw all the oligarchs, rightly or wrongly, they had all their super yachts and wealth confiscated and stuff. And so these are just some of the problems you get when you get to FU money. One of the other very obvious things people do is they go into property, don't they? So they'll buy second and third houses and in order to try and keep up with inflation. But I mean, you're the property man, Sid. I'll let you talk about the grief involved.
No, I mean, Yeah, it's been obvious here, at least in the UK. You've seen the number of properties that have recently been over the years been purchased by expats. Everybody parks their money here, and they're just not being lived in. So you've had the Russian money, the Chinese money, money from other parts of the world, Middle East as well. It's all come here for properties, and it didn't take long. I mean, when the war started, Russian properties were confiscated just like that. So they might have thought that they are safely parking their money in a jurisdiction where it's going to be safe from sort of confiscation, but it wasn't. So you just never know. And owning properties is a lot of hassle as well. I mean, I've owned properties and they are just nothing but hassle most of the time compared to the reward you get. Yes, as long as the system was working towards inflationary system was helping you get rid of your debt and the interest rates were low, properties made sense. But it doesn't take much for everything to change, and it has changed now. And most of the landlords here, with the taxation, with the way the interest rates have gone, are now trying so to get rid of most of the properties that they own because it's just prohibitive now to own and store your wealth in a way that it won't lose its value.
Yeah, and I mean some of the other things that wealthy people go into are classic cars again for that rarity. They're not going to build any more of those. There's no supply left for those, or art. Big name art. And one of the side effects of this is that it drives up these prices so high that it excludes a lot of people. So you look at classic cars, for example, and there's a lot of people that are passionate about classic cars, but they've been driven out of the market because you end up with wealthy people with excess money, which is fine, but then they end up piling into classic cars, which brings the price up, which then excludes an awful lot of people. And it's the same with property, like London property, New York property. Sure, it's always going to cost more money to have an apartment in Manhattan than in the middle of Ohio. That makes sense. But the incredible differences we're seeing, I think, are being driven just by the fact that the money is broken.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. I think people are going to use any asset they can to save the value of the money that they have.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And things like, so you have apartments or you had property, whatever. And I bet stuff happens, right? And it just takes time. It zaps time out of your week. So you end up getting to the point where it's like, well, why am I owning these things? I thought I made wealth so as I could save my own time to do stuff I wanted, right? So it comes out to, are they looking after you or are you looking after them?
That's amazing. That's a really good point, actually. And I was just thinking about it. I mean, the whole reason you have money is so you can buy back your time, right? Because it's the only finite commodity we have. We've got so many years on this planet, whether you like it or not, you can't borrow it, you can't buy more of it, you can't get interest on it, and it's only getting less and less. I remember a while ago, this point was proven to be by a friend of mine. I went to his house, and the back of his office door, there were like tallies, like you have on people do on prison cells. And I say, what are
Yeah.
these tallies for? And he said, oh, these are they called tallies? Are they?
I
They
don't
are.
know. I'm not big
I
into
think so.
prison culture, to
Anyways,
be honest.
and it's just where you have four lines with the
Yeah, I
diagonal
know the
cross.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So he had loads of them at the back of his door, and I was like, "What is that, mate?" And he said, "That's the number of years I have left to live." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I'm going to live up to 80. I think that's pretty much the best case scenario given the life expectancy of a bloke in this country. And assuming I have all those years, I've only got so many left." And he says, like, just it reminds me that that's the only valuable commodity. And it changed my perspective that day. And you realize that when you buy properties, you buy these cars, fine, you can enjoy cars and what have you to a degree. But you realize you're spending more and more of your time to look after this money, which is not really the way it was meant to be. So
And
you're right. I'm not sure whether you're looking after them or they are looking after you.
And just how much of a better world it would be if you could just park your wealth into some asset that doesn't depreciate every year, and it just frees you to go about, more creative endeavors if you want, or, creating more value for society rather than having to spend all this time, dealing with broken dishwashers with tenants, or, it must be just such a drag on society. And I think it's just not measured or thought about.
And actually, to add to that, that's a really good point. And to add to that, you also start thinking to own properties, to own cars, to buy wine, uh, you need to learn about it. You can't just outsource that to somebody else. 100%. You'll need to know how to manage your properties to a degree. You'll need to know what good cars look like and how to maintain them before you get somebody to do it for you. And life shouldn't have to be this complicated. You're a good engineer, or you're a good doctor, or you're a good writer or a journalist. That's what is your forte. That's what made humanity become so successful, because we all chose niches that we could focus on, and the others did what they did best. You did what you did best, and humanity progressed. So it doesn't make your life simpler. It only makes your life more complicated.
Yeah, and I mean, just to come back for a second to your talk on time. I mean, it's such an epiphany when you realize that time is the most scarce of all assets. And I love this example of, if you take a broke 18-year-old, not, who's got $5 in his pocket, and you say to him, if you want, you can be Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world. Would he do it? Honestly, probably not, because he could have all those billions of dollars. But I mean, Warren's what, 90 years old now? Yeah. Nobody's going to take that trade, right? So time is far more valuable than money. But obviously, money does allow you, hopefully, to free up more time. Hopefully.
Yes. But it's broken, so it complicates everything.
For sure. And hopefully we have a solution for that.
Yeah, I think that's what the article gets to, and we'll carry on from here. So next, Jameson says in his article that in some cases, they operate in murky legal areas without much precedent. But it's not a problem if authorities challenge the use of given strategy. The wealthy will send their elite attorneys to do the battle on their behalf. That's a good point, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, it comes down to this inequality of wealth, doesn't it? And the more money you have, the more opportunities you have, and the more money you can throw at that money in order to safeguard it and grow it. And they're just opportunities that just aren't open to the vast majority of people.
And it's an interesting one, because I, for the longest time, was doing my own tax returns, right? Because I'm cheap like that.
My God, how do you do that?
I know. And then you realize that I spoke to somebody who said, do you know what? You're leaving money on the table. I said, what do you mean? He says, there's so many things that you don't know you can claim for legally, very much they're allowed, but you have no idea what they are. And I said, that's true. So he says, you need to get an accountant. But accountants don't come cheap. Good accountants don't come cheap. But again, the flip side is that they should save you more money than they cost you, these professionals, right? But in order for them to save you money, you have to be able to afford them first. And that's where the cost of having that access to that professional advice is only limited to a few people.
Not to mention, not to beat an old horse, but coming back to this whole, how much time are you saving every year by having someone else do it for you?
Yeah, true. No,
unless you're one of those weirdos that enjoys doing tax returns.
Yeah, God, no. Gosh, no. But yeah, you still have to put things together. But it goes back to the point of simplicity. And you think everything, just by adding more and more of these things, you're not adding simplicity to your life. You're just adding more complications. It's simple as that.
Yeah, for sure.
And that really is a good point. The next point, what does he go on to say there, Tiago?
So I'll quote here. So he goes, Bitcoin lowers the cost of achieving extreme asset protection to the point that it is reachable by the average person. So again, this comes back to the whole, Bitcoin fixes this, but I've yet to see a problem it doesn't fix in the financial world. And this is just yet another example, right? So for the sake of $80, you can buy yourself a Trezor, and you don't need elite lawyers, right? Nobody can take that off you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's the He goes on to talk about it further, a little bit further, which is like there is no minimum value required in order to attain this position. So any amount of Bitcoin can be FU money. And that is, I think, the crux of the matter here. That it's very democratic, it's very equalized in terms of giving everybody the ability to hold on, get some sort of property insurance, so to speak, of their own. And you don't have to have many Bitcoin, do you? You can just even half a Bitcoin. It gets the same level of protection as maybe 100 or 1,000 Bitcoins. It's the same technology protecting every asset on the blockchain equally.
Correct. It comes back to this equality thing that seeped into the whole Bitcoin network and culture. And then he says, with Bitcoin, you can create a trust that is secured not by the laws and courts of a specific jurisdiction, but by cryptography and a global network that can resist even nation state attacks. And this is really one of the fundamental things of Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is the first thing that people can actually own, right? You may think you own your house, but look at those Russians. I bet they thought they owned their houses, they owned their super yachts. They're gone overnight. Next time you want to remodel your house, add a story or something, see if you can do that without permission from the state, right? Whereas with Bitcoin, you physically own it. And it's irrespective of the laws and the courts. It's just the network. Is your private key valid or not?
And I think that I see a big problem with that, coming to terms with it, is you get so used to having such a complicated life, so many things scattered everywhere that you're trying to manage. And it almost sort of makes you feel important that, oh, I've got this to do, I've got that to do, because I've got a call coming with this person and I've got to manage the property there and I've got to sort of go see this car over there or do something like that. Bitcoin takes all that away from you and you suddenly have a lot of time at your hand. So be careful. You'll have a lot of time on your hand and you wouldn't know what to do with it. So to rethink that in terms of whether you want a simple life, a rewarding life, or you want a complicated life.
Yeah, and again, that just comes back to, I think that comes back to just cutting out the noise, right? Increasing the signal to noise. All those things you just mentioned, they are just noise. They're noise created by a defective system. And it shouldn't be like that. I think it's just the default way for, it's all we've ever known. Yeah. Right. But I think there's a much better way to do this. And it's just very exciting. Bitcoin, I know it's an old cliche, but Bitcoin is hope.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, no, I think it does it really well. As you said, using cryptography is doing what your army of accountants, an army of lawyers, an army of XYZ professionals that you would have hired to do. It just does that seamlessly in the background.
Yeah, indeed. So the article continues, I'll quote here. It taps into a key component of the security model afforded by cryptography, defensive asymmetry. That is, the cost of attacking such a system is far greater than the cost of defending it, thus dissuading an attacker from even trying. Not to say that there are no longer real-world consequences to those who would break the laws of their jurisdiction, but rather that the Bitcoin network rejects gatekeepers. So I love this. So he's clearly pointing out that obviously there are consequences to breaking the law. Just because you have Bitcoin doesn't mean you can go and do what you want, right? Yeah. It's just that the network remains completely neutral.
Yeah.
And the network won't hand over your Bitcoin to the authorities.
Yeah. Or any other gatekeepers will not be able to dictate how and why Bitcoin should or should not be, kept by you or what have you.
Yeah, and this defensive asymmetry he talks about comes down to the key pairing. So it's trivial to create a private key. Anybody can do it in seconds, but it's essentially impossible to figure out what that private key is.
Yeah,
from a hash, and that's what gives it that defensive asymmetry, right? So it's super simple to create it and store your Bitcoin, but it's impossible to guess it if you don't already know it.
Yeah, and that's where I think also it goes on to show the network is very defensive. I think with the proof of work, that's where it comes in. But we'll go into that in another session of why proof of work is what it is.
Yeah, and it comes back to this point that even, you might only have $20 worth of Bitcoin, but you have the full defensive force of the network behind those $20. So you have the same protection as Michael Saylor has with his 120,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. It does democratize the gatekeepers of the sort of network for you. So they protect your network with as much force as they would for anyone else, and at a very small cost compared to hiring an army of lawyers and accountants to go out doing your work for you.
Yeah, it comes back to equality again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Everybody's the same.
Yeah. I think that's what
Bitcoin
Jameson
don't
is
care.
getting to, isn't he? He's just saying that it was very complicated beforehand to A, make money, B, keep it safe. And Bitcoin just simplifies that. Or as they say, Bitcoin fixes this.
Yeah. So good article by Jameson. Highly suggest you go and give him a follow. I think he's more active on Nostr now. Like
he is, yeah. He's very active on Nostr. I think a lot of these players are now coming more and more into Nostr than they are on Twitter.
Yeah. And we'll also put a link in the show notes for Kaza. Again, we're not at all sponsored by them, but just a great product, and yeah, we like it a lot.
Yeah, and if you do want to know more about them, we've also done another episode. Was it number 2 episode, which was talked about storing Bitcoin, that covers some of these wallets?
Yeah, that's right.
Which is worth having a listen to if you're unsure about storing Bitcoin.
Yeah, for sure.
But with that, thank you for your time, and we look forward to sitting down with you again next time.
Thanks, Sid. Speak next week.
Yes, thanks, Tiago. Bye.